Hello, Reddit tribe. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Reading Reddit. So, right at this time, I'm going to let you know that it will be a very intense ride. This video will be quite long, and I'm going to give a trigger warning here as it deals with a young man in an abusive foster home. If you would like to navigate away from this video, I will show you one in the corner. I also have a 5-minute intermission to pause and regroup, and at the end of the video, we will have two short mood booster stories. So thank you for spending your time with me, and we will get into our main story. My life of abuse in the foster care system with multi-revenge. The story I want to tell you is one of sadness and heartache. I started out life in poverty, living with my parents in a house that had some wooden floors and mostly dirt floors. My mother has a long list of mental issues, and my father was an alcoholic and thankfully not the abusive type. Me and my sister were taken from our home when I was 7 and she was 4. We got placed into the foster care system in Kentucky. It's my understanding at the time foster parents in Kentucky could have up to 4 kids per room, and they didn't have a limit of how many a single person, foster parent, could keep. Linda's home was a long house with 6 bedrooms, and she was keeping at least 8 kids at a time. In the foster care system, it's not uncommon to see a child stay with us for just a week and be released back to the families. So we had different kids coming and go all the time. The beginning. When we entered the foster care system, it was a really scary time for us, and I'll never forget the screams of our parents as they ripped us from our home. Because we didn't have running water and electricity, the old barn converted into a house wasn't suitable for children, according to our social worker. When I first arrived, I had broken my wrist and I had my arm in a cast. The first thing we did was go shopping for clothes, as I didn't bring any with me. The foster family. The foster home we went to was run by a woman we'll call Linda, and she was a widow. Her husband had passed away in the 80s. She has 4 sons and a daughter. Her youngest son, we'll call Jay, was still living with her because he had fallen from a truck when he was a kid and damaged his skull. This caused him to have a learning disability, and he could not read or write, and at the time of me living with them, he was about 26 years old. Her other son, Chase, was the oldest, and he was a plumber. Another son is Dean, and he owned 5 large farms and ran a grocery store. The 4th son was Cody, and he died in the 80s from being shot. Her only daughter was Sandy, and she was very kind to us. When we returned from shopping, I put my things away and was then given a trash bag and told to go outside and not come back until all of the loose trash was picked up. Just to let you know, now, this was more of a work camp instead of a loving and caring home. While I was picking up the trash, Jake was in the swimming pool and they had beside the home. He yelled for me to come to him and he asked me if I wanted to swim. I told him I didn't know how to swim and I can't because of my obvious broken arm. He then grabbed me and tossed me into the pool, and I screamed for help. I really felt like I was going to die that day. He took his time but jumped in and pulled me out. He told me to stop crying as if I would have drowned. No one would have cared because I didn't matter. I remember his words like it was yesterday. When I finally got to bed that night, I couldn't sleep and I cried the whole night, missing my parents. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a hard 12 years of life to come. Verbal abuse, slave work, and essay to girls. Being told that you were worthless, didn't matter to anyone, you'll never be anything, was commonly said from Jay and Linda as they used that to demoralize the kids. They treated all of the foster kids this way and would tell us that we are lucky to be living with them, as this was the only way we wouldn't be in jail or dead. They told us if we ever left, we would end up in and out of jail because we are just as worthless as our parents. Anytime one of the kids wanted to do anything after school or even play sports, They would tell them that they don't matter and will never be anything, so why waste the time now? I was also threatened to be put in a boys' home away from my sister if I ever told anyone about how Linda treated us. At a young age, you don't know any better, sadly, and you're too scared to think otherwise. All the boys worked the farms of Dean, and we didn't get to bed until 11 p.m. We got up early morning at 4 a.m. to do farm work with feeding cows, chickens, and pigs. After we finished our morning work, we had to quickly scramble to get cleaned up for school as the bus arrived at 6:20-ish a.m. every day. You never had time to do any schoolwork after you got home because you had to eat and then go back outside. It made passing classes in school really hard because I only had the bus ride home to get any work of my homework done. Dean had lots of tobacco farms, and as you can imagine, he was doing very well for himself because he had free labor all year long. Raising tobacco isn't a very easy job by any means, and it's even harder when you're just a kid. This kind of life went on for the whole time I was at the home, and nothing ever got better. Remember that this foster home keeps boys and girls from all walks of life. Also remember that Linda's 20-something son Jay lives with her as well. One night I was up going to the bathroom when I could hear faint crying. The crying was coming from the girls' room, and I went to find out what was wrong. I opened the door to find Jay being intimate with a girl that was about 16 years old or so. I ran to tell Linda, and he quickly ran out of the room after me. All of the noise woke Linda up, and Jay told her that he caught me sneaking into the girls' room. At that point, I'm about 10 years old or so, and I try to explain to her what happened. She told me I'm telling lies and I should be ashamed of myself. She told me Jay would never do such a thing and I was in serious trouble tomorrow. I talked with the girl on the school bus the next morning, and she said that it was her idea to have intimacy. She told me that she had been flirting with him and she was hungry for it. I told her I was going to tell the social workers, and she said that if I did, she would claim it never happened. When I got home, I was punished to clean out this old crappy garbage bin that they had behind the home, and it was full of loose garbage from bags getting ripped. The garbage bin was built of wood pallets and it was really large. They refused to give me any gloves to pick up the trash, and as you might know, trash normally has food in it too. Of course, all of this is rotten and full of maggots. It took me about 6 hours to clean it out. Later that week, when we went to the social worker's office for our visitation with my parents, I told the social worker what happened to the girl, and she pulled me into a private room to talk about it. I told her everything that was happening, and she said that she'd stop by tomorrow after we get home for a surprise visit. What I later found out is that the social workers in my county hated conflict and paperwork, so they would always give the foster homes a heads up on visits. The next day when we arrived home, her car was sitting in our driveway. When I walked in, she took the girl out to her car to have a talk. When the social worker was away, Linda tells me she knows what I've done and I'm going to wish that I had never opened my mouth. The social worker comes back in with the girl and sits in the living room with Linda, Jay, me, and all of the other foster kids. She goes on to tell us the importance of telling the truth and makes an example out of me. She told the other kids not to tell lies like I do, as it causes unneeded stress and issues for everyone. After she left, Linda told me that she is going to make me pay for this, and it might not be today, but one day. Remember this phrase: getting adopted and physical abuse. When I turned 16, I had been in the foster care system for about 8 years, and my parents finally signed us over to the state. My social worker told me she's going to place us in line to be adopted, and we will be visiting with new parents in the following weeks. I was very heartbroken, but I was also excited as I couldn't wait to get away from Linda and her family. Weeks go by and we never get to visit anyone, and I start getting worried. One day, Linda comes to school to pick us up and tells us that we are getting adopted today. I was really confused because we hadn't met with anyone. We arrive at the social worker's office and go in with Linda. We go into a room where my parents are and paperwork is on the table. Because I was 16, I had to sign paperwork stating that I understood what was going on. The social worker tells me Linda is going to adopt us, and I start crying on the spot. I tell them that I would rather be dead than to be adopted by her, and the social worker told me she understands my anger because I hate to obey rules. She was convinced that I was hating Linda because I was a rebel and the normal teenager who had hated following rules at this age. I told her that's not true, and she said she knows it to be true and she doesn't want to hear me tell any more lies. My parents are both crying and they have already signed the paperwork weeks ago. Linda signs hers, and I refuse to sign mine. The social worker told me if I don't sign it, it doesn't change anything as I'll still be adopted by Linda. With foster kids, you're not allowed to lay a hand on them to discipline them, and now that we are adopted, that's out the window. Now, more abuse starts that we never had before. Now, when Linda gets mad, she will throw things at me, hit me with coffee cups, remote controls, chairs, or anything else she could get her hands on. Jay then began to beat me like I was a man when I talked to him back to him, or not doing what he said the second he said it. At this point, I felt broken and alone. My sister was treated like a princess, and it's because she arrived at the home when she was 4. So she only knows Linda as her only parent and always did what she commanded. My sister at the time had no real understanding of who Linda was and how awful her family was. My sister was over the moon about being adopted and having Linda's last name. My sister was brainwashed into thinking that Linda could do no wrong and that I was just a troublemaker. I felt like I had lost the only family I had. She was my everything. And I sacrificed so much because I never wanted to be separated from her. My grand plan in life was to turn 18 and go live with my parents away from Linda and her family. It wasn't long after I was adopted that my father was diagnosed with cancer of the throat. I was crushed by this news as my father was my hero. I was only with my parents until the age of 7, but they truly loved us and provided for us the best they could. My parents had never raised a hand to us growing up and treated us with the love kids needed. My sister and I had monthly visits with our parents while in foster care and never missed any of that. We would get dropped off at the social worker's office where our parents would walk with us to the local park and play. They didn't have a car or anything and used a local program for people in poverty to get access to transportation. We had a local program run by the county that would pick people up and drive them to the grocery store, doctor's visits, and court. It was like Uber, but it was limited as to where they would take you and how often. My uncle is helping my parents the most that he can, and he takes my father for all of his chemo treatments. He is also coming to Linda's to pick us up to go and see my parents. At this point, we're doing home visits with my parents, and it's not easy for my father to travel. My father has been fighting cancer for a little over a year at this point. One day we are home for a visit with my father, and he's in really bad shape. While he was gone for a chemo treatment, someone broke into his house and stole all of his pain medication. My uncle tried to get the medication refilled and was turned away because they didn't have a police report. My uncle tried to get the medication refilled and was turned away because they didn't have a police report. My father knew who stole the pills and didn't want to turn him in as cops to poor people is the enemy. I was in art class and was called to the front office to take a call. My husband, or my, excuse me, my uncle had called to tell me my father tried to unalive himself and he's being transported to the hospital. He told me that he was on his way to pick me and my sister up to go see him. My father lasted a few days and passed away from his liver shutting down. I was able to see him before he died, and he could squeeze my hand to let me know he could understand me. I made sure to tell him how much I loved him, and I promised to make him proud. I'm telling this part of the story because of how Linda and her family treated me afterwards. They told me that deadbeats like my father are lazy people who draw a check every month paid for by working people. They said it's a good thing he's dead, and now my mother needs to drop dead as she draws a check too. They told me this on my way from the hospital. I sit in the main back of the van in silence and not shedding a tear. I was no longer going to let them control me and keep me down. I made a promise to myself that I will do everything in my power to be better than them, and one day I would show them what my pain feels like. My father passed away on October 25th, 12 days before I would turn 18 on November 7th. My mother was soon after awarded to the state and placed into a nursing home due to her mental issues. Making it on my own. The day after we put my father to rest, I started working with my uncle painting barns and sealing driveways. When I lived with my parents, I missed too much school when I was in the first grade and failed. So getting out of high school, I would be 19 years old. I had plans to go to Houston, Texas and learn underwater welding as that's where the money was. My uncle was paying me even on days when we didn't find any work to make sure I had enough money to make it on my own. I had saved up about $1,200 and graduated high school. My uncle had paid a driver to take me and Linda down to Texas. Linda had to go with me because I was under the age of 25 and she had to sign paperwork stating she wouldn't be helping me with any student loans. We set out for Texas and we are driving her van as my uncle's truck had broken down the day before and he only had his huge work truck and that wouldn't be feasible to take. We get about 4 hours into the trip and Linda is frustrated. She's telling me she's tired of being in the van and she no longer wants to do this. She orders the driver to pull over in the next city. He does, as she says, because it's her van, and she kicks me out onto the sidewalk. I have a bag of clothes and $1,200 in my pocket. They then take off and I watch them drive away to keep watching for a few moments to make sure they're not coming back. I felt a relief sensation rush over my body. I'm free. I'm finally free. Of course, this isn't where I wanted to be, as at 4 hours south of Kentucky isn't Texas at all. But I picked up my bag and walked up the sidewalk and trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I could get a bus ticket and make my way down to Texas, but I don't have the first idea where a bus station is. Please understand that I had never been outside of my hometown before this. I had never met a person of any other race before. All I've ever done was go to school and work on a farm. I had no real education and hardly made it out of school. I come across a school in a shopping center and I decided to check it out. Now this school isn't even around today and was shut down because it was a for-profit school that gave you no value, and of course I had no idea of that at the time. I walk in and talk with the front desk about getting info for the school. She sends me to talk with a lady in admissions and I explain to her my situation. She tells me how I can get funding to go here and how she can get me housing tonight. Alright, so at this time, thank you. I am going to go ahead and pause for intermission. I'm just going to go ahead and give you I'm going to put on a nice little video of relaxing waves or something, and we're going to come back in about 5 minutes. And now we're back to the second portion of our story. Because right here is when we start to see some revenge. Linda's on fuck around. And now this portion is to find out. I was still keeping tabs on my sister back in Kentucky. At this point, my sister is about to get married, and I am going to walk her down the aisle at the church Linda always took us to growing up. Please understand that Linda is a big figure at her church and well respected. This is important to understand for later. I drive up the weekend of the wedding and get a hotel room about an hour outside of where we grew up. My sister's best friend in the world, and that's even true of today, calls me, and we'll call her Karia. She tells me that my sister's fiance is abusive to her and that she wants to call off the wedding, but Linda told her she couldn't and not to embarrass her at the church. Linda knows that he's abusive to my sister and told her she needs to obey him as he will be her husband. On the day of the wedding, I walk my sister down the aisle like normal. The pastor does his thing and says some words and whatnot. Then comes the part where he asks if anyone thinks they shouldn't be married, they must speak now. This is where I get up and say, I object to my sister being married to an abusive drunk. You could hear a pin drop for a minute, and Linda's face is blood red. I then go on to say how Linda had known about the abuse and told my sister she was going to get married no matter what and not to embarrass her here today. Linda then loudly exclaims that I'm a known liar and everyone knows they can't believe a word I say. The pastor at this point asks me to please leave, and my sister spoke up for me, telling everyone that what I had said was the truth, and we ran out of the church together. Linda was later removed from the church management and asked to please not come back to the church as they don't believe in abuse. I know what you're thinking. Oh man, I wish I could have been in the pastor's office to hear that conversation and to see the look on her face. After all of this happened, my sister moved in with Karia, where she would later meet her husband. The final revenge. It had been about 7 years from the wedding crash. I'm now married and I have a house of my own and living a great life. My sister has married a real man who treats her right, and they have a great little girl together. Karia is now working at the county courthouse and does a lot of work with properties and taxes. She calls me one day to tell me Linda's property tax is way behind and they didn't get the tax lien lifted, and now they will have a tax deed sale of the property. I knew this was my time to strike and pay them back for a fraction of the pain they had caused me. I show up at the auction, and the only other person to show up was Jay and his wife. When he noticed me, he turned pale and then tried to be all buddy-buddy with me. I was very friendly, and he asked me why I'm here. I tell him it's to help keep the property in the family, and I had no problem helping out. I let him know that if I get ownership, I'll pay the taxes for them, so they won't need to worry about this being a problem ever again. His brother Dean had given him the money needed to purchase the property back, so he had cash with him to pay for the taxes and fees. I told him to keep the cash and let them know you took care of the taxes. So the bidding starts at a little over $2,000 because of the back due taxes and fees. I bid on it, and Jay doesn't. I easily win and now have instant ownership of the property. I go down to the courthouse with Jay and I finish all the paperwork with Karia. Linda had fallen behind on property taxes because she was giving the money to Jay to pay for it. Well, it turns out that Jay is what we call a pillhead and was using the money to buy sweets. Linda doesn't keep foster kids anymore because of her age, and she wasn't allowed to, so they didn't have money coming in besides disability and SSI. When I arrived to the house, I told Linda how I regret being a horrible child. When I arrived to the house, I told Linda how I regret being a horrible child, and now that I'm older, I've grown out of it. I let her know how much of a mother she was to me and when I didn't have one, and that I was here to pay her back. I told her now that I own the property, she'll never need to worry about property taxes ever again. I let her know I'm going to remodel her house, but she can't live in it at the same time. I told her this works out. Because I won the bid, the county would automatically evict them. Now, Linda is a person who thinks we've never been to the moon, so tricking her into believing me was easy. She told me she could stay at Dean's house while I'm remodeling hers, and she was very excited. I told her not to worry about any of the belongings they have, as I'll make sure they are covered up and moved when needed. I tell her a lawyer will be sending over some paperwork in a few days. I then hire a lawyer to do an ejectment of Linda and Jay from the property. I don't know if I could have done this a different way, but this was the advice I was given at the time. It took about 2 months for everything to be fully mine and them evicted. With them evicted, and now that all the belongings have stayed in the house past 30 days, I now own all of it. I got in contact with the local fire department to find out what I needed to do in order to burn a house down on my property. They informed me that it has to be a controlled burn. I'll need a permit to close off the road as the home sits near a public road, and I had to have the water shut down and the power disconnected. The water was easy, but it took a while for the power because they had to remove all the wires running to the pole and remove the transformer. The fire department gave me a date and time I was allowed to do the burning, and I coordinated with the sheriff's office to close the road. I got my permit from the city, and now I just had to sit and wait. The day of the great fire, I prep the house with lots of straw inside, and I make sure to take all of the doors down and open all of the windows, as I wanted this to burn as fast as possible. I go to Dean's house to visit Jay and Linda. I tell them that I wanted to take them out by the old oak tree for lunch. This tree was in a field across the road from the home. When we worked on the farm, we would eat lunch in the summer under the shade of this tree. Linda is in a wheelchair, and Jay has a bad back, so he doesn't move around too well and almost needs a wheelchair. Drop them off, and I tell them to enjoy the snacks, and I'll be right back as I'm going to set fire to the old stuff I ripped out of the house. It's not really uncommon, or it's really common for people where Linda is in a wheelchair, and Jay has a bad back, so he doesn't move around too well and almost needs a wheelchair. I drop them off and tell them to enjoy the snacks, and I'll be right back as I'm going to set fire to the old stuff I ripped from out of the house. It's really common for people where we live to burn trash. I call the fire department to let them know I was going to start the fire and make sure they had the address. I met with the officers closing the road off to let them know I was about to begin, and they might encounter some family members trying to get by them and not to let them. I then went behind and started fires from under the house with packed straw. I'm standing beside them while they eat and chat with me about life and what I'm doing with my career. It's not too long before the fire starts to peek around the sides of the home. They start screaming about the fire and we need to call 911. This is when I tell them I had the road closed, and the fire department already knew that I was going to burn down my house on my property. I told them that what they are seeing is just a fraction of the pain they had caused me over the course of my life, and I want them to know what a fraction of my pain feels like, as I could never make them fully understand. At this point, Jay is trying to call his brothers, and I reminded him that I have the road closed and they can't get by. It takes less than 20 minutes for the house to collapse into a heap of junk. The whole time, I'm watching them as they sit and sob. Jay tries to fight me, and I would just move away from him as he's high and can't really move well anyway. About 30 minutes has passed, and the fire gone, with just smoke and embers glowing. I get in my car and drive back home, knowing that they have now lost everything they have. They didn't lose as much as I have, but it was the closest thing to it. Closing. Linda passed away in 2010, and Jay lives with his wife in an old trailer somewhere. I still own the property and refuse to sell it to anyone because I don't want them to ever have the chance of owning the property again. I go back every year to check on the property to make sure that they haven't moved a trailer on it or something on my land. From my understanding, the property was in the family for more than 100 years. I haven't talked to any of them, and I never plan to. What I want is anyone reading this to take away that abuse is never okay. Ever. If you are being abused, do not listen to the people abusing you. They will lie and put you down to hold control over you. If you can get help, anyone that you know that's being abused, please, please help them get help. As I said, I knew this was going to be intense. And now I am going to, I know that if anything, this is definitely something that when I first read this, I was like, I was looking for ProRevenge, but wow, this is like bit by bit by bit. He ruins the reputation, or she ruins her own reputation. He exposes her. And then she loses the one thing that and then she loses the house. I love it. And I love it for her. And if there is a bad place in the afterlife, I hope whatever it is, she's in it. I don't believe that, but I think that once you're gone, you're gone. So let me get to the mood boosters here. The first story is a mood booster about travel. I was traveling to the south of England to the north of Scotland to start a new job the next morning. I had taken a train up to London and was supposed to get on an early morning flight from Heathrow. The bus to the airport, however, was cancelled, and I had to make my own way using a series of night buses. However, it was about 2:30 a.m., my phone was dead, and I had never used London's night buses before. I was young and a little scared, standing in the middle of Victoria trying to figure out the fated bus schedule, when a woman came up to me and asked, "Are you all right, love?" And I explained through tears that I thought I was going to miss my flight and I didn't even have an Oyster card. She looked up my route on her phone, wrote down all the possible variations of buses and trains that I would need to take, including the times. She waited with me there the entire time, like 20 minutes. Then, when the bus came up, she paid my fare. No cash on London buses. And I got out and looked at her, and she shrugged and said, "Oh, I'm not getting on the bus. You just look like you needed someone." I think about her every once in a while, and I'm incredibly grateful for her. You know what? They say that angels exist everywhere. I'm so glad that this woman was able to get to where she needed to go, and I think the universe just puts people where they need to be sometimes. And this one is of the disability community here. I once took my young son to a local science center for a day of fun. I also have cerebral palsy. I get around well enough. Sometimes I use a wooden cane, but I'm alright unsupported. I rock a mean limp and have terrible balance, but if you were to see me walking around, most would assume I had been injured at some point. While walking around, I spotted this woman with a young daughter of maybe 7 or 8 using a walker and sporting a pair of leg braces. The mother and I locked eyes a few times throughout our free roaming day until eventually our kids started interacting with the same exhibit. We were standing there watching them, and I turned to the mother, and before I could even speak, she said, "Cerebral palsy? You too, huh?" We ended up spending the rest of our day together chatting about the lives and experiences and going over the many advancements and therapies that have been developed since my childhood. She ended up telling me at the end of the day that seeing me being a single dad to my son and being so independent in spite of my disability gave her a lot of peace of mind. She said she worried a lot about what her daughter's future might hold in terms of her independence. It was just an all around really nice experience. I love this because a lot of times, disabilities, people have, and I'm not even going to front. Like there are some times when I'm even taken aback by someone's expression of a disability, and all of them aren't physical, by the way. We can't always see them, but I'm really happy that OP in this story was able to give some encouragement to a woman who was raising a child with a disability. It is not easy, I'm sure, and there are a lot of things that caretakers worry about for the future of their child. Or so, you know what? Thank you so much for joining me for this very intense but very thrilling and also very fulfilling episode of Reading Reddit ProRevenge Family Edition. See you soon, and if you made it this far, please comment your favorite TV show. See you soon. Have a great day, and thank you so much for spending about 45 minutes with me. Have a great day.